What if the walls of your own home were hiding a multi-million-dollar secret, and the person you pay rent to would do anything to keep you from finding it? When a young woman moved into her dream apartment, a drafty baseboard led her to a lost fortune and a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Chloe Mitchell had spent 4 exhausting months navigating the brutal, unforgiving Boston housing market before she stumbled upon the listing for 342 Commonwealth Avenue. As a 28-year-old freelance graphic designer, she desperately needed a space that could double as a home office, but everything in her price range was either a glorified closet or a basement unit prone to flooding. So, when she saw the advertisement for a first-floor apartment in a historic Victorian brownstone in the prestigious Back Bay neighborhood, listed for a fraction of the market rate, she assumed it had to be a scam. Yet, desperate for a decent workspace, she scheduled a viewing. The building was an architectural marvel, boasting the classic bow-front windows, intricate masonry, and heavy wrought iron doors characteristic of the designs laid out by legendary city planner Arthur Gilman in the 19th century. Standing on the marble steps, Chloe felt a surge of excitement. The landlord, Gregory Harrison, was waiting for her in the opulent, wood-paneled foyer. Gregory was a man in his late 60s who looked as though he had inherited his wealth, but slowly lost the ability to maintain it. He wore a tailored tweed suit that was fraying at the cuffs, and he had a nervous, erratic energy about him, constantly dabbing at his balding forehead with a monogrammed silk handkerchief. During the tour, the apartment exceeded all of Chloe's wildest expectations. It featured original crown molding, working gas, fireplaces, and a massive, floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookcase that spanned the entirety of the living room's east wall. The rent was unbelievably cheap, but Gregory Harrison was rigid about a set of highly specific, bizarre stipulations in the lease. He was adamant that Chloe was never to drill, hammer, or even use heavy adhesive command strips on the east wall of the living room. Historical preservation, Gregory had muttered, his eyes darting toward the heavy mahogany shelves. The woodwork is entirely original to the 1890s. The city's historical society would have my head if so much as a hairline fracture appeared in that wood. You must promise me, Miss Mitchell, that you will leave that wall exactly as it is. Thrilled to have secured such a beautiful apartment, Chloe eagerly agreed, signed the lease, and moved her belongings in the following weekend. For the first 2 weeks, everything was idyllic. The natural light was perfect for her design work, and the neighborhood was quiet. However, as she began to settle in and meticulously plan the layout of her custom drafting desks and ergonomic furniture, something began to nag at her designer's intuition. The proportions of the living room felt fundamentally wrong. Chloe had an eye for spatial reasoning. When she walked down the exterior hallway of the building to reach the laundry room, she noticed the distance from her front door to the back stairwell was roughly 30 feet. Yet, inside her apartment, the living room only measured 24 feet across. At first, she dismissed it as a quirk of old architecture. Perhaps there was a thick utility shaft or a chimney breast hidden behind the plaster. But the discrepancy refused to leave her alone. Driven by a mix of professional curiosity and mild obsessive-compulsive tendencies, Chloe retrieved her digital laser measuring tape. She stood flush against the west wall and pointed the red laser across the room, directly at the massive mahogany bookcase on the east wall. The digital readout beeped. 23.8 feet. She marched out into the public hallway, placed the laser against the same starting plane, and measured the total length of her unit's footprint. The readout glared back at her. 29.2 feet. There was nearly 5.5 feet of dead space entirely unaccounted for behind the east wall. The mystery intensified 3 nights later during a violent nor'easter storm. The wind was howling off the Charles River, rattling the heavy window panes of the old brownstone. Chloe was sitting on her sofa, wrapped in a thick blanket, sipping tea and watching a movie, when she felt a distinct, icy breeze graze her ankles. She paused the television. The apartment was completely silent, save for the drumming rain outside. She followed the cold draft, crawling on her hands and knees until she reached the bottom right corner of the massive mahogany bookcase. The freezing air was whistling out from a tiny gap between the heavy wooden baseboard and the floor. Heart-pounding, Chloe fetched a heavy-duty flashlight from her kitchen drawer. She pressed her face against the cold hardwood floor and aimed the beam of light into the narrow crevice. Instead of seeing plaster, insulation, or brick, the beam illuminated empty darkness, and the distinct, unmistakable shape of pristine hardwood flooring continuing beneath the wall. Ignoring Gregory Harrison's strict warnings, Chloe began to run her hands along the intricate carvings of the bookcase. She pushed against the heavy shelves, pulled at the decorative wooden columns, and prodded the thick baseboards. After 20 minutes of frantic searching, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, tucked deep underneath the bottommost shelf, completely obscured from view. It was a heavy, forged iron latch. Taking a deep breath, Chloe wrapped her fingers around the cold metal and pulled downwards. A loud, metallic clack echoed through the quiet apartment, sounding like a deadbolt retracting from a heavy strike plate. To her absolute astonishment, the entire right section of the massive floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookcase shifted forward by half an inch. It wasn't a wall at all. It was a perfectly balanced, heavy-duty concealed door. Trembling with adrenaline, Chloe wedged her fingers into the gap and pulled. The heavy wooden structure swung outward silently on massive, well-oiled industrial hinges. A rush of cold, incredibly stale air hit her face, carrying the scent of dry rot, mothballs, and aged paper. She raised her flashlight, aiming the beam into the pitch-black void. She wasn't looking at a utility shaft or a bricked-up chimney. Chloe Mitchell was staring into a perfectly preserved, windowless room that had been completely hidden from the world. Chloe stepped cautiously over the threshold, her sneakers making no sound on the dusty, antique hardwood floor. She swept the beam of her flashlight around the hidden room, coughing softly as she disturbed decades of stagnant air. The space was exactly the 5.5 feet wide she had calculated, but it spanned the entire length of the living room, creating a long, narrow chamber. It felt less like a forgotten attic and more like a subterranean bunker, hermetically sealed from the passage of time. In the center of the room sat a massive, ornate oak desk. On top of it was a heavy, black Underwood No. 5 typewriter, its keys thick with dust, and a brass desk lamp with a shattered green glass shade. Surrounding the desk were towering stacks of leather-bound ledgers, their spines cracked and peeling. But what immediately caught Chloe's eye, making her heart hammer violently against her ribs, were the two massive, iron-strapped steamer trunks sitting heavily in the far corner of the room. They looked like something pulled from the wreckage of an old ocean liner, fastened with heavy brass padlocks that had long since turned green with oxidation. Drawn to the desk first, Chloe gently opened the top ledger. The pages were filled with meticulous, handwritten accounting entries, dating back to 1931. As she scanned the columns, the numbers staggered her. Tens of thousands of dollars, astronomical sums for the Great Depression era, were recorded next to vague, cryptic notes like North End shipments, customs payoff, and GM distribution. At the top of one page, a name was scrawled in thick black fountain pen ink. Gaspare Messina. Chloe's breath hitched. She was a true crime enthusiast and recognized the name instantly. Messina was one of the founding bosses of the Boston Mafia during the height of the Prohibition era. She turned to the inside cover of the ledger and found a faded signature marking the ownership of the book. Benjamin Harrison, chief accountant. The realization hit Chloe like a physical blow. Benjamin Harrison, the landlord's grandfather. This wasn't just a hidden room. It was a mob accountant's secret vault. Benjamin Harrison must have been skimming off the top of the syndicate's bootlegging empire, hiding his illicit wealth behind a false wall in his own brownstone to keep it safe from both the federal government and the dangerous men he worked for. Unable to resist the pull of the iron-strapped trunks, Chloe walked over to the corner. She grabbed a heavy brass paperweight from the oak desk and brought it down hard on the oxidized padlock of the first trunk. The brittle, corroded metal snapped with a sharp crack. She threw off the broken lock and hoisted the heavy, groaning lid open. Her flashlight beam illuminated a sight that made her drop the heavy paperweight in shock. The trunk was filled to the brim with neatly stacked canvas bank bags, stamped with the faded logo of the First National Bank of Boston. Interspersed among the bags were velvet jewelry pouches. Chloe reached in with trembling hands and pulled open one of the canvas bags. It was stuffed with thick bundles of crisp, perfectly preserved Series 1000 928 gold certificates, 5 to $101,000 bills. She didn't need to be an appraiser to know that. Between their face value and their rarity among modern collectors, she was staring at millions of dollars in untraceable cash. She opened a velvet pouch and gasped as a cascade of diamond brooches, heavy gold pocket watches, and emerald rings spilled into her palm. But as the initial euphoria of the discovery washed over her, a sudden, chilling detail caught her eye. She looked down at the massive iron hinges of the hidden bookcase door. The wood around them was ancient, but the metal joints were gleaming with a fresh coat of clear industrial lubricant. She looked closer at the floor near the entrance. Beneath the thick layer of uniform dust, there were faint, recent scuff marks. The landlord knew. Gregory Harrison's paranoid stipulations, his refusal to let anyone drill into the east wall, his desperate, frayed appearance, it all suddenly made terrifying sense. Harrison knew his grandfather had hidden a massive fortune inside the building, but he hadn't known exactly how to access it. He had been renting the apartment out, forbidding structural changes to protect the wall, while secretly searching the unit himself whenever it was empty. The oiled hinges meant he had recently discovered the mechanism, but perhaps hadn't yet figured out how to bypass a secondary lock. Or maybe he was simply waiting for the dead of night to extract the trunks without raising suspicion from the neighbors. Chloe hadn't discovered a forgotten secret. She had walked directly into the middle of a desperate man's active treasure hunt. Suddenly, a sound shattered the heavy silence of the hidden room. Click, clack. It was the unmistakable sound of a heavy key sliding into the deadbolt of her front door. Chloe froze, the velvet pouch of diamonds slipping from her fingers and landing softly on the dusty floor. The front door of her apartment creaked open. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed across the hardwood floors of her living room. Chloe scrambled backward, frantically shutting off her flashlight. She was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. "Miss Mitchell?" Gregory Harrison's voice called out, echoing hollowly in the living room just feet away from her. His tone was vastly different from the nervous, polite man who had handed her the keys. It was low, gravelly, and laced with a quiet, menacing urgency. "Chloe, are you home?" She clamped a hand over her mouth, suppressing a panicked gasp. She was trapped. There was no other exit from the windowless room. She listened, paralyzed with fear, as Harrison's heavy footsteps moved slowly across the living room carpet. Thump, thump, thump. He was pacing the length of the apartment. Then, the footsteps stopped. He was standing directly on the other side of the mahogany bookcase. Chloe could hear the faint rustle of his tweed suit jacket. She heard the sound of knuckles rapping sharply against the thick wood, inches from her face. "I know it's here," Harrison muttered to himself, his voice vibrating through the timber. "Grandpa Benjamin, you greedy old bastard. I know it's right here." Chloe held her breath until her lungs burned, clutching a fistful of 1,928 gold certificates in the pitch black, waiting to see if the bookcase door would swing open and seal her fate. Chloe held her breath until her lungs burned, clutching a fistful of 1,928 gold certificates in the pitch black, waiting to see if the bookcase door would swing open and seal her fate. Only half an inch of solid mahogany separated her from a desperate man who had a multi-million-dollar motive to make her disappear. On the other side of the woodwork, Gregory Harrison let out a frustrated, guttural sigh. Chloe could hear the faint scraping of his fingernails against the trim. He was running his hands frantically over the exact spot where she had found the hidden iron latch just minutes prior. He was so close. If he simply knelt and reached beneath the bottom shelf, it would all be over. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, her mind racing through a terrifying calculus. There were no windows in this subterranean vault, no secondary exits, and no cell service through the thick plaster and brick walls. She was entirely at his mercy. Suddenly, the sharp, piercing ringtone of a cell phone shattered the tension. Harrison cursed loudly, the sound muffled by the thick wood. Chloe heard him step away from the bookcase, his heavy footsteps retreating toward the center of the living room. "I told you not to call me on this number," Harrison hissed, his voice echoing in the empty apartment. He sounded frantic, a stark contrast to his usual haughty demeanor. Chloe pressed her ear against the back of the heavy wooden door, straining to catch every word. "I have the money," Harrison barked into the phone, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer panic. I just need a few more days. The old man hid it somewhere in this damn unit. I know he did. The blueprints I found in his safe deposit box prove the footprint is off. It's here. You tell the Donato brothers that if they give me until Friday, I'll have their $2 million with interest. If they send anyone to my house again, I'll go to the cops. A chilling pause filled the apartment. Whatever the person on the other end of the line said, it drained the remaining bravado from Harrison's voice. Please, Harrison whimpered, the sound pathetic and small. Friday. Just give me until Friday. I'm getting a crowbar. I'm tearing the wall down tonight. The new tenant is out for the evening. I'll have it. The line went dead. Chloe heard Harrison let out a ragged breath, followed by the sound of his heavy footsteps rushing toward the front door. The deadbolt clicked, the door slammed shut, and the apartment fell back into a heavy, oppressive silence. Chloe collapsed against the cold, hardwood floor of the hidden room, gasping for air. Her hands were shaking so violently she dropped the flashlight, sending it rolling across the dusty floorboards. The beam illuminated the massive steamer trunks, casting long, eerie shadows against the brick walls. She had a window, but she had no idea how long it would remain open. Harrison was coming back with a crowbar. He was going to destroy the bookcase. Survival instinct, honed by years of living in a tough city and fueled by an overwhelming surge of adrenaline, finally overrode her terror. She couldn't just walk out of the apartment and call the police. The moment the authorities arrived, the room would be sealed. The IRS, the FBI, and the state government would swoop in, confiscating the Prohibition-era cash and the stolen diamonds under civil asset forfeiture laws. Chloe would be left with nothing but a broken lease and a landlord who might send the mob after her for ruining his only chance at survival. If she was going to survive this, she needed leverage, and she needed a head start. Working with frantic precision, Chloe unzipped the heavy canvas messenger bag she always carried her laptop in. She dumped her sketch pads, pens, and chargers onto the dusty floor. Grabbing the beam of the flashlight, she knelt beside the open steamer trunk. She didn't bother with the bulky, heavy canvas bags of cash. The 1,928 bills might be difficult to fence quickly without raising federal alarms. Instead, she reached for the velvet pouches. She stuffed her messenger bag with handfuls of diamond brooches, heavy emerald necklaces, and pure gold pocket watches. They were untraceable, inherently valuable, and easy to carry. Within 3 minutes, her bag weighed nearly 20 pounds. It was a fortune. As she zipped the bag shut, her flashlight beam swept across the heavy oak desk one last time. The top ledger, the one belonging to Benjamin Harrison, still sat open. But Chloe noticed something she had missed in her initial panic. Beneath the heavy brass base of the desk lamp, there was a pristine, modern manila envelope. It was completely free of dust. Frowning, Chloe carefully slid the envelope out. She opened the flap and pulled out a stack of legally notarized documents. As her eyes scanned the top page, her breath hitched. It was a deed of trust, dated just 3 years ago. The documents detailed a shocking truth. Gregory Harrison didn't own the brownstone at 342 Commonwealth Avenue. His grandfather, Benjamin, had placed the building into an ironclad, irrevocable trust before his death, leaving the property to his estranged daughter, Gregory's aunt, who lived in California. Gregory had been forging his aunt's signature for years, illegally collecting rent, and desperately trying to find the hidden mob money before the aunt's lawyers finalized the sale of the building to a commercial developer. Chloe smiled, a cold, calculating thrill washing over her. She didn't just have Harrison's treasure. She had his prison sentence in her hands. Chloe shoved the manila envelope into her bag alongside the fortune in antique jewelry. She clicked off her flashlight, plunging the room into darkness once more, and felt her way back to the heavy mahogany door. She pushed the hidden bookcase open just enough to slip through, the oiled hinges remaining completely silent. She stepped back into her living room, the familiar smell of her lavender oil diffuser, a sharp contrast to the stale, dusty air of the vault. She pushed the heavy bookcase back into place. It clicked, shut, seamlessly, erasing any evidence that the room had ever been disturbed. She had to leave, now. She sprinted to her bedroom, grabbed her rain jacket, and threw it over her shoulders. She didn't pack clothes or toiletries. Those could be replaced. She just needed to get out of the building before Harrison returned. As she walked quickly down the hallway toward the front door, the sound of heavy metal clanging against the exterior brick wall echoed over the noise of the storm. Someone was outside her window. Chloe froze, pressing her back against the hallway wall. She peered around the corner into the living room. Through the crack in the heavy curtains, she saw a figure standing on the fire escape in the pouring rain. It was Gregory Harrison. He was holding a massive rusted steel crowbar, preparing to smash the glass of her living room window to avoid using the front door again, and leaving a paper trail of his entry. Panic flared, but Chloe forced it down. She had 90 seconds before he shattered that glass. She slipped out her front door, locking the deadbolt behind her, and ran silently down the carpeted hallway of the brownstone. She burst through the heavy front doors and out into the torrential Boston rain. She didn't stop running until she was 4 blocks away, ducking into a brightly lit 24-hour diner. Soaking wet and shivering, she ordered a black coffee, sat in the back booth, and pulled out her phone. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated, high-stakes maneuvers. Chloe didn't return to the apartment. Instead, she checked into a luxury hotel under an assumed name, paying with a vintage gold pocket watch she fenced at a discreet high-end jeweler in the Diamond District for a cool $40,000 in cash. Her next stop was the office of Jonathan Hayes, one of the most ruthless and expensive property litigators in Massachusetts. Sitting across from the imposing lawyer in his high-rise office overlooking the harbor, Chloe laid out the manila envelope she had stolen from the desk. She didn't mention the hidden room, the prohibition cash, or the mob connections. She simply told Hayes that she had discovered her landlord was a fraud, presenting the forged trust documents as proof. "I want to buy the building," Chloe told the stunned lawyer, sipping a glass of sparkling water. "And I want to buy it from the rightful owner, the aunt in California. Offer her $2 million cash. Fast closing. No inspections. Establish an anonymous LLC to make the purchase, and use these funds to secure it." She placed a heavy leather satchel on his desk. When Hayes opened it, he found a dazzling array of pristine, antique diamonds and emeralds, easily appraised at triple her asking price. The lawyer asked no questions. He simply drafted the paperwork. Meanwhile, Gregory Harrison was living a nightmare. He had broken into Chloe's apartment that stormy night, completely destroying the antique mahogany bookcase with his crowbar, only to find the hidden room already breached. The velvet pouches of jewels were gone, and the deed of trust was missing. He was left with nothing but heavy canvas bags of 1,928 gold certificates, money he couldn't take to a bank without triggering a federal investigation, and money the Donato brothers wouldn't accept as clean payment. 3 weeks later, the trap finally snapped shut. Gregory was sitting in his squalid basement office, trembling as he waited for the loan sharks to arrive, when the door swung open. It wasn't the mob. It was a pair of Boston police officers, accompanied by Jonathan Hayes. "Gregory Harrison?" the lead officer asked, stepping into the dim room. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding multiple counts of real estate fraud, wire fraud, and forgery. We also have an eviction notice." "Eviction?" Gregory stammered, his face draining of color as the officers snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. "You can't evict me. I own this building." "Actually, you don't," Jonathan Hayes said smoothly, handing Gregory a crisp, legally binding document. "The property was legally sold last week by the rightful trustee. You are currently trespassing on private property owned by Commonwealth Holdings, LLC." As the officers hauled a screaming, crying Gregory Harrison out of the brownstone, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The tinted window rolled down, revealing Chloe Mitchell. She watched her former landlord being shoved into the back of the police cruiser, her expression unreadable. She was now the sole legal owner of 342 Commonwealth Avenue. As the owner of the property, everything contained within its walls, including the millions of dollars in pristine, historic currency, still sitting in those heavy iron trunks, belonged to her. She hadn't just survived a deadly encounter with a desperate man. She had played a flawless game of chess, using his own family's dark history to steal his empire out from under him. Chloe rolled the window back up, adjusted a breathtaking 1930s emerald brooch pinned to her designer jacket, and smiled. It was time to start remodeling. Can you believe she outsmarted the landlord and bought the building with his own family's hidden treasure? What would you have done if you found a secret mob vault in your living room? Let me know in the comments below. If you loved this crazy real-life